can see how even the principle that from age to age, some divine huge wave comes and transforms societies and adjusts dharma. Adjust dharma means adjusting the harmony, social harmony, that gets upset. And this is seen as two antagonistic forces moving about. Very often, these are classified as Indra and Vitra. You see in the mythology that is there entrenched in the Vedas, this struggle between two forces. Inevitably that happens. And this comes out, of course, very prominently in Zoroastrianism. In Zoroastrianism, we see that these are angels or messengers of light and messengers of darkness. And then this comes through when the Jews were in Babylonian captivity, and the whole idea is brought to light and perpetuated in Christianity as well. So the last time we spoke about the Ramayana, because we had a gap in between, last Saturday was dedicated to our celebration, we left off whereby the young lads, Rama and Lakshmana, had been taken by Vishwamitra into the forest. And the forest was very ominous with strange sounds and so on. And as I say, not only is this a history, but there are various practical and philosophical layers within the story. We all go through our forest. It is always, sometimes or very often, it is threatening, it is dark. There are unknown things. What do we have a fear of? We always have a fear of the unknown. But fortunately, Vishwamitra is strong and fearless. And in previous parts, in previous talks, we told the whole story of Vishwamitra, how he struggled, how we all struggle, but how persistence, determination carries through, and above all, a pure intention at the end. Pure intention means no egocentric positions whatsoever. And then we went through how Vishwamitra took a vow of silence, Mona. And so when would we expect these monsters who are disrupting the ceremonies to appear? Well, they'd appear within 6 days, no doubt. And so on the 6th day, they were prepared. And a great battle ensued, and the monsters were defeated. And any quibbling about whether a monster, if it is male or female, Taraka, all these quibbles get laid to rest, because establishing harmony doesn't hold to these social conventions. And under the guidance of Vishwamitra, who gave mantras, powerful mantras, weapons, instructions, these deleterious forces were conquered. Within us too, we have innumerable weapons, but the primary weapon we have is the same as in the story, mantras. Mantra mobilizing thought. There's nothing more powerful than thought. And thought, when mobilized, without contradiction. In other words, attention, and an intention that goes through, will go through infallibly, because philosophically speaking, at the back of it is only one thinker in this one mind, the supreme cosmic mind. We don't get this idea from nowhere. We have this idea entrenched in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad that tells us that this is a witness, this is an enjoyer, therefore. This is a knower, this is a thinker, absolute. You may think that you have your own thoughts, but all we're doing is using the energy that arrives at our substation and steering it here or there. Now, once this conquest has been done, the next question is, what next? What next? And so, just to bring you up to speed, after this event, after this dramatic event, which is ostensibly why Vishwamitra brought the boys in. The royal brothers, they were obliged, of course, by virtue of this mona, this vow of silence, to keep an unbroken vigil. They did it for 6 days, as I mentioned. Now, if we just get a summary sense of the drama that ensued, we can imagine a dark cloud coming over the area and a demon battalion, a battalion of these dark forces, but they're headed by Maricha, Subahu. They move forward, and after making or forcing really a defense from Lakshmana and Rama, who discharged their various weapons, Manava Astra, on Maricha, the weapons played their parts. And initially, instead of killing the victim, it was more or less a warning. Well, Miki gives a little bit of detail here. You can translate it. So, in the silence, you could hear again just the deep chanting of the Veda, just to set the scene. And Marichas, Rakshasas, and lean, tree-tall Subahu stood open-mouthed, their long fangs plain. The heathen screams had died in their throats. Their rain of filth had ceased around them. Don't forget, they were throwing bones and corpses and all kinds of filthy things on the sacrifices. But the prince of Ayodhya, that is Rama, the guardian of Vishwamitra's yajna sacrifice, didn't wait for the stunned demons to recover. Like blue lightning, Rama invoked an Agnya Shastra, that is a yastra, a weapon, a missile that has the characteristic of fire. And in a wink, in a very quick flash, made a heap of ashes of lanky Subahu, quicker than thinking. It's very interesting that this comment is put in. Quicker than thinking. Now we say that the ultimate speed is the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. Thought is quicker. And a thought is so quick, it instantaneously has its effect. So in this way, he undid the mortal elements of the rest of the hordic, or the horde, with another astra, that is Vayavyastra, that is using Vayu. Now we have to understand what the elements are. Firstly is using fire, next is using Vayu, usually translated as wind. We can add to it a dramatic understanding of it by saying that it is that weapon that belongs to the wind deity. Imagine the force of a wind. We know the force of a wind. It knocks over roofs. It makes thatches fly away. Wonderful, calm and beautiful and panoramic scene. Somebody's ideal of a kind of paradise with azure seas and palm trees and so on. We can see it in places like Jamaica and so on, the Barbados and what have you. We have this idea. But look how many hurricanes come through there and destroy the whole landscape. So the weapon blew them apart as a gale would a gale would a dust heap in its path. You can imagine it. Then, shouldering his bow, Ram says, "Did you see Lakshmana? The first Astra was a compassionate one. The Manavastra didn't kill Maricha. It only punished him with fire and water, and it has purified him. No malice is intended, not even against these destructive monsters. So out of compassion, let's give you some lesson. We won't destroy you completely. Then Lakshmana wondered that his brother saw to the very sea just briefly, for no miracle was beyond his, that is Rama. The sacrifice at Siddhashrama was completed, and in joy Vishwamitra called Rama. And embracing him, the Rishi cried, Rama of Ayodhya, your name shall be immortal. Men will remember you as long as the world exists, and we ourselves are remembering him. Some 7,000 years later, from yuga to yuga, from age to age, your fame will be sung. And the yajna you have helped me complete in the teeth of evil will bless the earth. Long ages are after you, and I are no more in it. Prince of Light, today you have won a great battle. And Vishwamitra saw into the past and the future as if they were plain before his eyes. And the Brahmarshi, that is Vishwamitra, don't forget, he's a Brahmarshi. He thought, not even Ravana of Lanka. Don't forget, this drama starts off with Ravana, who's oppressing everybody. Who is evil incarnate, shall prevail against you, Rama. Don't forget, the reason why Ravana is so powerful is he has boons against everything except man. He's superior to man. If gods cannot defeat him, then certainly a man is puny and cannot defeat him. So nothing will prevail against Rama in the light of seeing what he's done with all these monsters. But I fear your way as long and fraught with sorrow before you rid the earth of these Rakshasas. And as we go through the story, we know what that sorrow is already, not in any great detail yet, but we know that the Ravana manages to capture the other half of Rama, that is Sita. Isn't life beset with sorrows? This is not just a story with various embellishments. It is actually our own story. It is our own history. We all have sorrows. And we all have things that need to be conquered within us. Various negative forces, doubt and fear and temptations are all there, aimed at destroying us, whittling away our very character and that of those around us. And so how to deal with sorrow? This Ramayana, apart from any other lesson, will teach us how to deal with all the vicissitudes of life. Now Vishwamitra said nothing of these thoughts to the happy prince. He only joined the other rishis in crying, Jaya Vijaya Bhava, may you always be victorious. And at the end of the day, Vishwamitra said to Rama and Lakshmana, in the city of Mithila, King Janaka is performing another kind of yajna, and we are going to Janaka's sacrifice, and I want you to come with us. There's something there that should interest young warriors like yourselves. The bow of Shiva lies in Mithila, like an arc of the sun. It lies in Janaka's palace, worshipped with flowers, incense, and prayers. And he paused, then mused, you know, no Deva or Gandhava, no celestial being, in other words, or Ashura, any of the mightiest of the anti-forces, could ever lift Shiva's bow. No Kshatriya could do it, no divine person could do it. It's a relic there, it is left there, and nobody can string it. Nobody can even lift it. And many tried from heaven and earth, none of them moved that weapon by a hair's width. Rama, you must see Shiva's bow in Mithila. It is a wonder upon the earth. We will set out tomorrow. And so Janaka's yajna in Mithila has already begun, and we will go and join there. So that's the setting from where we left off last time. Now we begin a new episode, a journey, of course, that has to start off where we go to Mithila. Of course, we have to see that in these ancient days, there was a certain element of democracy in choosing a husband for a princess. And who was this princess? This princess was Sita, and just to remind you, we were born from a furrow, born from the earth, adopted by King Janaka. And is this just a bypass kind of incident, a kind of incidental commentary? No. The earth represents life, represents fertility. The earth represents earthiness. It represents our material life. In the other most ancient religion, other than Hinduism, is called Judaism, there is Adam. And if we explore etymologically that word, it is a mixture, it is some being that is a mix of spirit and clay, spirit and earth. And the earthiness, of course, is the physical human body. You may say when spirit gets added to it, it becomes animated. Indeed, the Greek for it is animus or anima, the thing that animates something, gives life to something. We can philosophically or in yogic language call this prana, energy, force. And force and spirit can't really find any distinction because the one really is the presence that moves everything else. So the group is going to set off to Mithila. Now we'll just gain the passage that is about this. And I'm just forwarding the text here to pick up on this episode. I just remember now, of course, that on their wanderings, or where they were, was actually the place where Lord Narayana, and I mentioned this last time, had performed his tapas, and it was there that he was born as Vamana. And I think we briefly mentioned the story of Vamana. So the place where all these incidents happened was called Siddhashrama. Anyway, in case I didn't cover this properly, we'll go into this. Mahabali was the son of Virochana, and he was the grandson of Prahlada. I have a feeling we are repeating this, but no harm. And Prahlada, as we know, was a good asura, and was such a powerful ruler that of him even the devas were afraid. Mahabali had by his deeds acquired the power of Indra himself, that is the highest celestial powers that you can attain. Kashyapa and his spouse Aditi, of whom all the gods were offsprings, prayed to Vishnu and begged him to be born as their son and protect Indra and the devas from Mahabali. I have to make a few commentaries here. Aditi is the mother of all the deities, but what we mean by deities, we always have to bear in mind. What we mean is forces, subtle forces underneath what we see as life and expressed and manifesting as the life we have at the moment, put into story form or mythological form as a spouse of Kashyapa. Anyway, the prayers were made, and eventually Vishnu was born of Aditi, naturally, as Vamana. Vamana was in the form of a young student, and he went to the yajna that was being performed by Mahabali. And in South India, Mahabali is actually there's a great festival around this figure. He's a great king. And all of the people were welcome, of course, to the yajna. And he said, I'm recalling this story from last time also, ask for and receive anything you want. And when Vamana presented himself as a sutta, as somebody who was suitable to request, yes, I want to ask for something. Then Mahabali's guru, Sukra, the preceptor of all the ashras, secretly knew who he was, the Lord Vishnu in disguise, that is. And nevertheless, the king granted this Brahmana, as he came in his disguise, whatever you want, you can have. I'll grant you anything. But Mahabali didn't pay heed to the warning that this was Vishnu in disguise. And this is, again, the philosophical lesson for us that, well, let me start again. Let me give you some recall from somebody who I was in contact with this morning. Sometimes in a state of immaturity, we think that we want a vision of God or a vision of something supernatural. It's a great mistake, because everywhere we look, we can get a vision of the divine. If we have an eye for it and understanding of the principles involved, we'll see that everything in nature is dressed up God. That's the first stage of our insight. Second stage, we'll see that everything that we see is a divine flow expressed. And another stage will be that everything that we see meaning all the senses, is really fragmented God, seemingly fragmented God. It's only God himself. And then ultimately we know that there's a transcendent aspect as well. So when we close our eyes to this, we become very unwise. And this happened to Mahabali. Knowing in principle, because he was told, this is the Lord dressed up in this form, he ignores it completely and says, you can ask what you want. And with a smile, Mahabali bade him ask what he pleased. All have, everything is at your disposal. I'm generous enough to give you money, jewels, the wide earth, and everything that inherits. And Vamana answers that actually wealth is not much use to him, and so on and so forth. But I want a little land. 3 paces is enough, 3 paces of ground. And the story, of course, is set in him being a small boy, small stature. Some even say a dwarf. And so Mahabali laughs. Oh, okay, 3 paces is okay. That's from here to there, approximately 1 meter, at the most 3. And so he smiles at the diminutive brahmachari's legs and said, so be it, and paced away. And the little bachelor suddenly grew in size into what we call Trivikrama, and with 1 step measured the earth. 3 means 3. 1 step he measures the earth. Now we can update that and say the visible universe, but let's put it as the earth. And with another, the entire heavens. And there's no room for a 3rd foot, because you've covered everything now. And so Mahabali, in agreeing, because he said, yes, I'll grant it to you, a man of his word, naturally had to bow his own head in a sign of humility, and Vamana steps on his head, and that becomes the 3rd step. And naturally, being the Lord, the step itself, the foot itself, has blessed the king. And so Mahabali, whose head was blessed by the touch of this Lord's foot, Narayana's foot, became one of the 7 immortals of the world. In other words, by declutching our own ego and allowing us to fall under the dominance of the divine, we gain the very highest. Anyway, this was a story that was told. This was of Mahabali, just as a side incidental story. And Vishwamitra adds that this is where, the place where they were, at first Narayana and later Kashyapa performed these tapas and resulted in the incarnation of God as Vamana. All right. Now, going on from there, and this is an event, this is setting the scene, of course, for what we described earlier, and the defeat of the Rakshasas and so on. And now we come here to this movement toward Mithila. The scene is very much like this. First of all, we have to understand that Janaka who was the king of Mithila, was an ideal ruler. And all these stories will contrast the ideal ruler and the non-ideal ruler. And today we see the same kinds of things. So who is an ideal ruler? It's not somebody who knows economics. It's not somebody who knows politics. It's not somebody who is wealthy. An ideal ruler is somebody whose character is flawless, who has the best intentions for his citizens, who is ruling with social justice, kindness, compassion, and with a sense of coordination for the welfare of all his subjects. This is the ideal ruler. In other words, Janaka was not just one person like this. He wasn't just an ideal ruler. He was a sage himself, a realized sage. And he was naturally engaged in what we call karma yoga. In other words, he wasn't in a cave. He wasn't in a monastery. He was in the thick of life. Anyway, because of all of this, he was much revered. And he was a friend, of course, of Rama's father, Dasaratha. And he had planned this yajna that I mentioned for various things, for progeny, among other things. When King Dasaratha had this yajna for that, then King Janaka was his guest. That's how close they were. Janaka wasn't only a brave king, but as we said, he was a realized soul, and he was well-versed in the Shastras, well-versed in the Vedas, and the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, among other things, will give us wonderful dialogues between him and Yajnavalkya. And he was also a beloved pupil of this Yajnavalkya. Now, desirous also of performing a yajna in Mithila, but this time for a different reason. Janaka, whose daughter was Sita, found in a field. He was plowing it, and there he discovered her, and he adopted her, and he took her as the infant goddess, Earth's gift to him. And taking the child in his arms, he went to his beloved wife and said, "Here's a treasure for us. I found this child on the yajna site that I was plowing, and we shall make it our own." And she joyfully consented. Of course, the earth is a beautiful place, and it's a place that represents, we call the earth Mother Earth, for good reason. How tolerant she is. We dig up her skin, we make deep holes in her to gain mineral wealth, we plow up her skin, and we damage her in the environment. One of the great concerns of modern times is environmental damage that is being done, pollution to the air, pollution to the rivers and the seas. But Earth is intrinsically beautiful, and the beauty, therefore, of the goddess Earth, the mortal eyes cannot see in its fullness, but we get glimpses of it as we gaze with thankful hearts at mountains and rivers and scenes and spring tides and autumn fields and so on. And so when we gaze on nature, it gives us a sense of awe and adoration and a sense of thankfulness. We don't ask for anything from it. We don't want anything from it. Something moves us to gaze on it and simply enjoy the scene. Naturally, therefore, Sita, being the Mother Earth embodied and found in a furrow herself, echoed this beauty. Her beauty threw into the shade that of Lakshmi, other goddesses, and so on and so forth. And so the story says that the child that was found here had a divine beauty, and so she was brought up in this way as a princess by King Janaka and his queen. Now she had reached the age of marriage, that's the point. And we recall how Dasaratha, before Vishwamitra came to his court and asked, please, for Rama and Lakshmana's help, Dasaratha and his advisors were thinking we should find a wife for Rama and Lakshmana and all the sons, actually. And so, coincidentally, Janaka's daughter Sita was of marriageable age, and there's an old custom that I began telling you about where a kind of democracy is there, and the princess is free to choose anybody by virtue of putting a garland around his neck, anybody that appeals to her, where she finds a connection and attraction. And how do you know this? Well, each suitor would have to exhibit their strength and their virtue as well, the combination of these two. And Janaka was very keen to have his daughter married. He couldn't find any suitable person worthy of Sita, so they had this, what is called Swayambhava, this kind of assembly where many kings assemble, many were princes and so on assemble. They all come to Mithila in this case, seeking Sita's hand in marriage. And of course, none of them were good enough, but there was a great test. Now, we already mentioned Shiva's bow there. And the bow was presented by Varma. It was Rudra or Shiva's bow. And 2 quivers also went with it, containing arrows. But it was an ancient heavenly bow. It wasn't an ordinary bow. Naturally, it belonged to Shiva. So really no ordinary man could ever move it. And the challenge was, can you lift this bow, string it, put the arrow in and shoot it? It was lying there as a family heirloom, normally speaking. So Sita would be given in marriage and so to one person of her selection, to that prince who could lift, bend, string the bow of Shiva. The bow had originally come to King Janaka from Varuna himself. Many, many princes who have heard of Sita's beauty and her purity, they all went to Mithila and they all came back disappointed because nobody could even lift the bow. Anyway, we know that the party is going in that direction, so led by Vishwamitra, the rishis from the Siddhashram that we know how it was established, were proceeding to Mithila with a whole procession. You can imagine bullock carts transporting luggage and so on and so forth. And also coming from an ashram, kind of like a Walt Disney picture, animals and birds from the ashram were coming along as part of the entourage. But of course, they were asked, please stay behind. I know you have a thrill and a joy to come with us, but please, your environment is the ashram. Anyway, it was evening time on their journey when they reached the river Sona. And there they all rested for the night, and Vishwamitra was recounting to Rama and Lakshmana the history of the place they were in. And you can see how this story has all these sidelines, but these sidelines are always meaningful. What is the history of the place? Anyway, getting up in the morning, they continued their journey and crossed another river. The river wasn't very deep, but by noon, they arrived at the Ganga. This is quite near Mithila now. They bathed naturally in the holy river. The rishis made lustrations to their forebears, as was the custom. You always have to honor the XY chromosome portion of how you arrived. All their aspirations you're fulfilling. And so they improvised a kind of holy place there, a kind of temporary camp or ashram there, and performed their pujas. They cooked their food. And when the meal was over, they sat around Vishwamitra. And at the request of these two princes, he told them the story of the Ganga itself. Himavan, the king of mountains, and his wife, Rama, had two daughters, of whom Ganga was the elder. Himavan sent her to the land of the Devas in response to their request, and she dwelt with him. Uma, the younger, won the favor of Shiva and became his wife. Sagra, who was a former king of Ayodhya, he had no son for a long time. And so with his two wives, Keshini and Sumati, he went to the mountains, the Himalaya. Don't forget, Krishna said, of all the mountains, I am the Himalaya. And there he performed tapas because mountains are a suitable place for this, austerities. And the sage Bhrigu was very pleased with the king. He blessed him and said, you'll get a number of children and you'll acquire undying fame. One of your wives will give birth to an only son, and through him your lineage will be continued. So we find it happened. And the other queen will bear 60,000 strong-armed sons. Sagara's wives bowed low before the sage and asked which one of them would get an only son and which one would get the 60,000 children. And Bhrigu asked each of them, what would their desire be? What do you want? Keshini said she would be satisfied with one son, but that one son would continue the whole lineage, the whole line. And Sumati chose the other alternative, not because it was the only one left, but she wanted more than that. And so the sage grants it. And satisfied, the king and his wives, they take leave of the sage and return back to Ayodhya. And as time goes on, Asamanaj was born to Keshini, and Sumati gave birth to a whole mass of children, which divided out into some 60,000 babies. And this army of children was taken care of by nurses. And so the story goes, as the years rolled on, while the 60,000 grew into strong, handsome princes, Asmanajas turned out to be a cruel lunatic. And he indulged in the pastime of throwing little children into the river and laughed happily as they struggled and died. The cruelty of it. So naturally, people hated such a maniac and banished him from the country. And to the great relief of Asamanajas's son, Amsuman, who was the opposite of his father, and he was brave, virtuous, he was an amiable prince, not like his father. And King Sagara launched a great horse sacrifice, and Prince Ansuman was in charge of the sacrificial horse. But Indra, in the guise of a Rakshasa, demon, he managed to carry off the animal. And the devas, all the deities, regarded the yagas or yajnas by mortals as a challenge to their authority, So don't forget, yajnas manipulate the devas or the tanmatras or the subtle forces of the universe. And so every yajna that a human being makes, they could feel it as a challenge. We are being manipulated. And so the devas regarded these yajnas by mortals as a challenge to their superiority and lost no opportunity of throwing obstacles in their way. And if, however, all obstruction was overcome and the yajna was completed, they accepted offerings made to them. And then he who performed the yajna got a due reward. So now the story goes like this. The king was greatly upset when he heard that the sacrificial horse was stolen. Indra had stolen. He sent out the 60,000 sons of Sumati to go in search of the animal all over the earth, and no pains were to be spared. Please retrieve this horse. The loss of the horse, he impressed on them, not only means obstruction to the yajna, it casts sin and ignominy on all concerned. And so you should therefore just recover the horse wherever it has been kept hidden. And then he who performed the yajna got his due reward. The king was greatly upset. So anyway, eagerly the sons of Sagara proceeded to search the entire earth, but the horse was nowhere to be found. They even started digging the earth, just as you would for buried treasure, and their anxiety didn't respect any place. They didn't care, and they didn't care about any people in their way. They only wanted to succeed in earning the hatred, actually, of all they met. The horse was not to be found, and when they reported their failure to the king, he bade them ransack even the netherworld also. And the princes did as they were told, and in Partala, that is the underworld, they saw the horse grazing in a corner of an ashrama, not far from the place where sage Kapila, who was Vishnu, sat in meditation. The princes at once jumped to the conclusion they had not only found the stolen horse, but they also had found the thief. Don't forget the horse had just wandered. And so they rushed on Kapila. Don't forget, Kapila, of course, is the founder of the Sankhya school of philosophy, a great, great psychologist, a great sage. So they pounced on him and declared, "Here's the thief pretending to be a yogi." Kapila, thus disturbed, opened his eyes, and the 60,000 princes were reduced to a heap of ashes. This is the power of a meditating sage. We can conquer anything simply by the focused concentration of meditation. Indra, the real thief, had artfully left the horse here with his very intent that you wander around here. And so that was how it went. And then King Sagara waited in vain for the return of the princes who had gone in search of the sacrificial horse. And after some days, he called his grandson, Ansuman, and said, "I'm anxious to know what has happened to the princes who went to Pawala. You are brave, so go forth with well-armed, arm yourself, and take men with you. Find out what has happened and come back successfully, please." So Ansuman went closely following the path of the princes and reached the netherworld, where he saw and paid salutations to the mighty elephants standing guard at the four quarters. We are told that elephants guard the four quarters of the observable universe, the earth, to give it solidity, nothing more. You see, an elephant has four solid pillar-like legs, and so the elephant itself represents solidity of the earth, and four stands for earth because four directions are there. So These guardians of the quarters uttered encouraging words and said that he would succeed in his mission. And when in due course Ansuman entered and went around Patala, he was delighted when he found the sacrificial horse grazing contentedly, being left to wander and find his way there, but were puzzled and distressed when he saw heaps of ashes all over the place. Could they be all that remained of his valiant uncles? Now Garuda, the bird king, brother of Sumati, Sagara's second wife, who chanced to be there, told Amsuman, "Those ash heaps are all that is left of the 60,000 sons of Sagara. They were consumed by the wrathful glance of sage Kapila. Dear child, take the horse, complete the yajna, and if these ashes are to be watered according to custom so that the souls of the princes may rest in peace, then Ganga should be brought down here from the land of the Devas." And so Ansuman rushed home with the horse and told the king all that he had found and learnt. Sagara means ocean also, of course, was immersed in sorrow at the fate that had overtaken his sons. However, the horse having been brought back, he completed the yajna, and grieving over his lost sons, and despairing of ever bringing Ganga down to the netherworld, he died disconsolate. Now, according to the Ramayana, Sagara actually lived for 30,000 years. I know, let's not question it, it's a story. And figures like 30,000, 40,000, 60,000, they shouldn't really confuse us, because 30,000 may mean either a very large number, just meaning a whole lot of things, or it could just mean 30. And we can choose what we like. So we don't have to be literal about it. Ansuman succeeded Sagara as king of Ayodhya and was in turn succeeded by Dilipa. And Bhagirath came from Dilipa. Ansuman and Dilipa, though happy and blessed in other respects, died grieving that they were unable to bring Ganga to Patala for the salvation of their forefathers. Don't forget that when the river goes and waters the area, they'll re-emerge from their ashes. So Bhagiratha was a valiant king, and he was childless, desiring progeny and hoping to bring Ganga down. He left for Gokarna for performing penance, leaving the kingdom in the hands of his ministers. Bhagiratha went through severe austerities, and with fire on all sides and head exposed to the hot sun, taking food but once a month, continued his austerities. Bhagiratha's name has come to signify great perseverance in any good cause. Now, obviously, I'm reading this from a text, but that gives us a pause a little bit to consider again the quality brought out by these stories. And we're telling you about the history, how Ganga came to be. And Ganga, of course, represents a great flow of divine grace coming, because water is life. But again, perseverance comes as a great quality. Let us bear in mind how much perseverance Vishwamitra had when he tried and tried and tried again to gain the highest Brahma Rishihood. So, same thing, perseverance. Perseverance in any good cause will yield its dividends. And Brahma, why Brahma? Because Brahma is the cosmic mind, pleased with the austerities, appeared before Bhagiratha and asked, "What would you have? What do you want?" Bhagiratha told him 2 wishes. "If you have pity on me, bless me with a child to continue the line of my forebears. And secondly, cursed by Kapila Muni, my ancestors lie in a heap of ashes in Patala, and the ashes should be washed by the waters of Ganga, so that their souls may ascend to heaven. And may you be pleased to order Ganga, please to go down. And Brahma replies, the Devas, that is, the shining ones, are pleased with your austerity. Your wishes are granted. But there's one small difficulty. The earth cannot withstand the force of Ganga's descent. It will plow up the earth. Shiva alone can stand it. And therefore, direct your penance and prayers to Shiva. And so, Bhagirath renewed his austerities, continued long without food or water. At last, of course, won Shiva's grace, as it must. And Shiva appeared and said to Bhagirath, I shall fulfill your wish. I shall receive Ganga on my head. May her grace be upon you. That is why when you see Shiva in meditating pose, the Ganga is coming out and he's using his head as a buffer for Ganga. So when Mahadeva, that is Shiva, promised help to Bhagirath, Ganga began her descent as ordered by Brahma, Brahma the creator of everything. And in her arrogance she thought she would fall on Mahadeva's head and sweep him away towards Patala. And so the three-eyed deity, namely Shiva, decided to teach Ganga a lesson. And the moment he willed it, the flood of waters that fell on his head were held by his matted hair as in an infinite receptacle. Ganga tried her best, but not a drop could emerge from the tangled maze of Shiva's matted locks. And this was a lesson to Ganga, to be sure, but a heartbreaking disappointment to Bhagirath. There was nothing for him but to pray to Shiva and increase his austerities and beg him. But this he did to such a good purpose, so effectively, that Shiva took pity on him, gently let out the waters of the Ganga. And he let these waters out in Bindu Saras, from where they flowed down in 7 small separate streams. 3 of them flowed west and 3 flowed east, and the 7th river followed Bhagirath, and who was full of joy at the approaching salvation of his ancestors. And so Ganga followed Bhagirath's triumphal chariot. The waters danced and shone like lightning flashes as the river made its course, and the Devas and Gandharvas assembled above to witness the grand sight. Sometimes slow and sometimes fast, now sliding down and now jumping up, the river went on dancing behind Bhagirath's chariot, and the folk of heaven enjoyed the sight all the way. And of her course, Ganga damaged the yajna platform of a rishi. His name was Janu. And the rishi took the entire flood in his palm and sipped it off. And Ganga disappeared again. And Bhagirath was sorely perplexed. If you live in Africa, you know the drama of the African plain would be, or plains, would be floods and droughts, floods and droughts. The Devas and other rishis approached Janu and begged him to forgive Ganga and allow Bhagirath to reap the fruit of his great austerities and perseverance. And the sage relented and let Ganga out through his right ear. And the Devas were glad and blessed Ganga by saying, coming out of the Rishi's body, as out of your mother's womb, you are now Janvi, that is Janu's daughter. And then again there was a further hindrance or mishap, and Ganga reached Patala through the ocean. And with the holy waters, Bhagirath performed the funeral rites for his ancestors and secured for them their entry to heaven. And Bhagirath's efforts having brought Ganga down, she is also known as Bhagirati. After concluding this story, Vishwamitra, this is the origin of the Ganga by which we are here, blessed the princes. What is the benefit of such a story? We can see that life is a struggle and nature is not plain sailing, nor is it meant to be. Otherwise, apart from anything else, it would be pretty dull. And to see how sacred these waters are, giving life ultimately to the ancestors which are there, that Kapila had cursed by his look. So in this same way, we are revived when we associate all these phenomena that we experience, including a river's flow, symbolizing a life, that we can trace it back to divine origin somewhere, always. So Vishwamitra then blesses the princes, having told them the story of where they were and what this Ganga represents and how it came to be. And the sun was then setting, and he said, "Let us say our evening prayers in the waters of Ganga, whom your ancestors brought down to this world. And those who bathe in the holy waters of Ganga, or read or listen to this divine story with devotion, will be cleansed of sin and endowed with virtue, strength, and unflagging zeal." And there we leave it off, because then we go to another chapter, which is Ahalya, and we'll pick this up tomorrow evening at 5:30. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Jai, Jai Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Ram. Jai Sita Ram. Thank you.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Merci beaucoup, Swami.